Hello everyone, I'm Daniel, and today I'd like to talk a little bit about the big guns in Arkham Horror, the card game. You've probably already seen this one. It's the Gatling Gun, the newest spoiled card from the next expansion, the Drowned City, and let's take a look at it and compare it to some of the existing challenges and existing cards that are big guns like it in the card game. So, this one is a 5 XP card and it costs 5 resources, so it's quite expensive both to put into your deck and to put into play. It's got all kinds of icons. It's weapon, firearm, illicit, which is typical for the rogue cards that are like this. Uses 12 ammo. That's a lot of ammo. And as an action, you can spend 1 to 6 ammo. Fight, you get plus X combat for this attack. The difficulty for this attack is equal to the combined fight values of all enemies at your location. Instead of its standard damage, this attack deals X damage divided as you choose among enemies at your location. X is the amount of ammo that you spent as part of this ability's cost. Okay, kind of a weird card here in that it does a variable amount of damage, but also has a variable difficulty. So the fight value is probably pretty high, but you get a whole lot of combat boost for this test. The way that I like to think about these cards, though, is what does this get you over other more conventional ways of fighting? So really, when you boil everything down to it on this card, you are dealing 12 damage. It might be in 2 attacks because you can just spend the 6 ammo twice and then you're dealing a whole lot of damage to a bunch of enemies at your location. You may or may want to not want to do that because of the difficulty. We'll talk about the card itself a little bit later, I think, in terms of evaluating it, but just baseline, you are maybe spending 1 action to put this out, and then at most you can, or at best maybe, you can spend 2 more actions to deal 12 damage to enemies. That's pretty cool, but is it worth the 2 hand slots, all of these resources, and all this XP when you compare it to other kinds of weapons? So this is just kind of an issue with talking about big guns in general, and I think it's worth highlighting, the benefits versus those costs. So benefits for the big guns, generally this large plus combat addition, your bonuses is going to be make it very likely to hit, which is, I mean, maybe not for this card because the difficulty scales quite a bit, but that is a huge benefit over other weapons, the level 0 and maybe level 2 or 3 firearms as well, that only give you +1 or +2 to hit. And when you're spending ammo, you really do want to hit because if you don't, it's a big problem. Think about this card in particular. If you're spending 6 ammo and you miss, the opportunity cost of maybe recovering that potential damage burst that you were going to do, where does it come from, right? What do you do now? When you do a basic fight and maybe you fail, what did you lose? Nothing. You're losing an action. Maybe there's retaliate, but it's not that big of a deal. If you use a melee weapon, obviously melee weapons in this game are very strong and pose a problem for the big guns here. What do you lose when you miss? Basically nothing as well. So do these cards give you enough in comparison? So you don't want to fail. And the purpose of having cards like this maybe is to not fail these tests. And for on higher difficulties, that's perhaps more important. Now, the big guns all do 3+ damage per shot. Almost all of them. I think a few may not. As long as you spend enough ammo. In this one, of course, you're doing quite a bit more. And per shot here, I mean the action. So a benefit for these big guns is saving you on actions for multiple fights against a bigger enemy. For a 3 health enemy, I'm not sure the Gatling gun is that good unless you have, of course, multiple at your location, and you can spend, say, 1 action and get rid of 2 3 health enemies. Whereas if you were having a machete in play or something very basic that just does 2 damage to an engaged enemy or any enemy at your location, you're going to be spending perhaps 3 actions to do 6 damage. And perhaps a little bit more difficult when you're trying to do 3 damage to one and 3 damage to another. And if your weapon only does 2 damage at a time, it's going to be actually 4 actions because that extra damage per enemy doesn't spill over to other ones. So this is kind of a nice way of dealing with that. Now, that's not the only way to solve that problem, right? Skill cards like Vicious Blow and other kinds of attachments to smaller guns get you that third damage too, but it's kind of built into this one card, which I think is quite nice. There's other bonuses potentially for the big guns. We'll see them as we look at all of them. That's my intention is here. For this card, I think the engage action, the fact that you don't need to engage enemies at your location, if they're aloof, right, this will deal damage to them as well. That is pretty good. So we'll look out for those sorts of things on the big guns, which tend to not appear on the smaller ones as much. With some benefits, there are some challenges. And the biggest one that everyone is a little bit shy of when comparing this to melee weapons for sure, at larger player counts, of course, is just the amount of ammo. As I mentioned, this does 12 damage. That's it. There's other ways, and we're going to talk about how the card pool solves these challenges in a second, but baseline, the one card in your deck does 12 damage. And is that actually enough? In lower player counts, maybe 12 damage is quite a few enemies. If you've got, six 2 health enemies or four 3 health enemies that deals with it. But when you have a large enemy like a boss or mini boss, of course, you could probably just spend everything from this one card and you can deal with them. By the way, that should be another big benefit for big guns, is they tend to do very well against the toughest enemies, the bosses. What's tricky here, of course, is if you have a card like this, how quickly do you run out of ammo? True for any gun or any firearm, but also, do you really want to use the ammo, right? If you have a small enemy that is only 1 health or 2 health, you don't really want to use a card like this unless there's multiples at your location, just because then you're able to take advantage of that one action. You'd rather use something very simple like a machete or a runic axe is pretty simple too. Those charges come back, even though it's kind of like a gun because it has uses. They come back so quickly that it barely counts. So what do you do with those? And not being able to hold a sidearm is another problem. So I'm defining the big guns here as basically all of the, I think, level 3 plus weapons that have 2 hand slots that are firearms. So you don't always want to use this card. You would like to save it for those boss battles. But how do you ensure that? How do you add this to your deck and have restraint to not play it and still deal with the smaller enemies that pop up? I think this card sort of does an okay job of saying, well, you still can use it against smaller enemies, but in general, you have to be really careful of how you're spending your ammo. Again, the other problem with ammo is if you fail, that you're losing quite a bit. But I think the hand slots are also a big issue here because think about it this way. If you are spending a lot to deal with enemies very efficiently with big weapons, which I think is part of the point of having them, you tend to have more actions left in your turn. So one of the cool things about Gatling Gun, I think, is that you can deal with a whole swarm of enemies right there in 1 or 2 actions. But then what do you do with your rest of your turn? If you're the kind of fighter that is efficiently mopping up every enemy and you don't have room for a flashlight, lockpicks, some other way of getting clues to help progress the game state, why did you what else are you doing, I guess, with the rest of your turn? Why did you need such an efficient weapon? Not to say that there aren't like slotless items that you could have that will help, or events to get clues, but my feeling is always that I'd like to have some of those really nice items in play that take up hand slots, and you can't when you're all in on these big weapons. So especially when you have something like this that takes up 2 hand slots, everything in my deck is going to also take up 2 hand slots because of the order in which they come out. Like, I don't really care which big weapon I have. It's very hard to play the small weapon first and then later kick it out for the big weapon because it's just better. Unless you're spending XP on everything, and that feels kind of inefficient too. Now, I don't really play these big guns too much because of these challenges. I much prefer the small guns or playing with melee weapons instead. And if you've had a lot of success with the big weapons, let me know, because I might be a little bit off here in my evaluation, but especially at lower player counts, I've not really found it worth the spot because the smaller weapons do just fine. So one of the challenges, as I kind of go through these in more detail, is that the small weapons, one-handed weapons, that is, are perfectly fine for the job, especially at standard difficulty. So, how do most fighters deal with these problems? As far as ammo goes, if you don't have enough ammo to last you the entire scenario, there are ways to put more ammo onto the cards. That's just a basic fact of the card pool. Now, the negative here is that we wanted that big weapon to be so efficient that you don't need extra cards, but of course you do. So it feels a little bit like a combo deck, and there's nothing wrong with that. But as you'll see, getting the small weapons up to speed is also a thing you can do with other cards. So I'm not so sure that, having a big weapon that you just refill all the time is any better than a smaller weapon that you just make better by making it deal more damage or having it have a larger bonus to hit. It's just maybe another way to do the same thing, but then the hand slot issue is still a big deal. So some Guardian cards here, extra ammunition, which just flat out puts 3 ammo tokens on a firearm, controlled by anyone actually. Cleaning kit, this is the upgraded one. It's really nice. It gives you +2 skill value as well, but basically gives you 4 more shots on the weapon, or in the case of the Gatling gun, it's just 4 more damage, which is kind of less good. Venturer just adds a single supply or ammo token to a gun. So there you go. There's another way to do it. In the rogue class, there's kind of better ways to do this, and that's putting way more than just 3 at a time. And Contraband, this is the upgraded one. There is a level 0 as well. The level 0 just doubles the number of ammo on the asset. The Contraband, that is the upgraded one, gets you just 2 on top of it if you've already depleted the weapon, which is at least better than nothing. It's expensive. The level 0 is 4. This one is 3. I love Swift Reload, though. This is a card that is fast. So another issue, of course, with all of these big weapons is when you run out of ammo, you don't have another one just sitting there ready. When you have the small weapons, you can have 2 in play, and once you run out of one, maybe you had during some downtime the ability to play a second weapon. And in this case with Swift Reload, it doesn't matter as much. You're just playing it to refill all of the uses, all the ammo on it, and then you just keep blasting away. I find that it's otherwise kind of awkward because you might have multiple enemies to deal with on a single turn, and you're going to run out of ammo in the middle of that turn when you still want to keep fighting, and you can't just play another gun. That's more. I mean, the level. The small guns, level 0, level 2 guns that are a little bit easier to play tend to get around that issue, but for the big guns, you kind of need something like Swift Reload, which, of course, with the Gatling gun, which had 12 ammo, this gets you all the way back up. But if you combine these, right, play Swift Reload first, or don't spend any ammo and play Contraband first, now you're getting a lot more on a card like Gatling Gun. 24 damage compared to 12 is really big, right? And you can keep going, right? Double that again to 48, and you don't need anything else. Are you gonna make that work? I don't know. That's something that is, I think, difficult to know unless you're really, really playing around that. And it's okay. That this is a way to play the game, especially with cards like Stick to the Plan, which let you put supplies set aside essentially at the beginning of the game, so you can play them at the right time. And Swift Reload also could be on Stick to the Plan for Leo Anderson. We're basically talking about here, since it's a tactic. It is a trick, though. So the newer card, Bewitching, which lets you put tricks set aside, just one of them anyway, one of Swift Reload anyway. That's also another option for a full rogue fighter. Yeah, I think this is an important component, and I suspect that we're going to see a little bit more like this from the Drowned City and future expansions that try to help us employ these big guns better. There just needs to be more ways to start with things like this in your opening hand or set aside. But there's at least one way to do it, and that is Stick to the Plan for Guardians, and then maybe Bewitching for rogues. So the hand slot issue. The other way to fix this, other than just not playing other weapons or just playing more two-handed weapons and writing over them, is to have some kind of a sidearm. So if you play Bandolier, for example, this is the level 2 version. There's a level 0 version as well. You get to put more things in your hand slots. So maybe it's okay to have a big weapon and then a flashlight, or some other tool to get some clues or heal or whatever it might be. Bandolier works, but again, the order in which you put things out can be difficult, and you have to hold back cards. It's another action to play an item. Yeah, it is an option. It does work, but can be a little bit difficult. Quick Draw Holster. This is a tool that takes up the body slot as well. And this one's kind of funny because it says that you can choose a firearm asset taking up only one hand slot in your play area and attach it here. And I'm talking about big guns. So why am I talking about this? Because you play this first, you play the small gun, you put it onto the quick draw holster first, then you play the big gun, and you're allowed to hold them all now. That's the best I can come up with. But yeah, it's not a great option. Really, what Guardians and off-class Guardians can do instead is play an offhand weapon that doesn't take up any hand slots. So Brand of Cthulhu is kind of a crazy good option since it takes up an arcane slot and deals with small enemies very, very well. That's kind of the whole point of having an offhand weapon. So if you have, a rat or I don't know, ghoul minion that's just 2 health and 2 fight, you're not wasting your ammo on something like that. You could probably kill it. Also good for doing the extra damage, like the 3rd damage, without spending an ammo that does 3 when you only need to do 1. So really cheap spell and works with probably most Guardian builds. It's not going to use up your arcane slots. For rogues, there's Hidden Pocket. I think this is a nice option for having an extra investigation item or another gun, because those are mostly illicit, and you can attach this to clothing or armor. Usually this is like leather jacket or heavy furs. And yeah, the order doesn't matter quite as much when you play these. You just have to have the armor down first or clothing and then put this down. But then if you had the two-handed weapon out first, that's okay, because now one of those hands gets taken up by the hidden pocket. So there are ways, but we're talking about lots of combo pieces here. Biggest problem, though, is why not just use a smaller weapon? So here are some typical one-handed weapons, even at low levels, that do a lot. Take a look at the Mauser. The Mauser C96 coming out in the Winifred pack. It has 5 ammo, and since it does 2 damage apiece, assuming you pass the test, which is something you have to deal with, this is 4 resources and 1 action, 1 hand slot that does 10 damage. 10 damage is a lot, right? We looked at a big weapon, the Gatling Gun, that does 12 damage. Granted, there's some risks with this weapon, right? You might fail, you might not succeed by 2, so you won't be able to ready it again. You're kind of only doing 2 at a time. But if you're purely looking at, cases where only 1 enemy, maybe 2 enemies show up at a time, and fairly rarely, this is all you need, right? Why do I need to do 12 damage in 1 turn? I really don't. I can have this in one hand, lockpicks in another, and I'm good to go for basically the whole scenario. Even having 2 of these in play is pretty good. Yeah, it's going to cost you 8 resources, but now I could do up to, 20 damage, right? For the 2 hands, when the Gatling Gun cost me 5 resources and 5 XP for that matter, to only do 12. So, this is just a really fantastic weapon, but it's a baseline level 0 weapon. So what makes the bigger weapons so much better than this? They're less risky. That's pretty much it, at least in my opinion, because you could use the Contraband, you could use the Swift Reload on this too, and you'd be pretty happy. Even the Guardian Guns, though, come with a lot of ammo. So this is a level 2 45 automatic. The level 0 is also 4 ammo, and it's 8 damage, right? You're looking at a card, a bunch of resources, they're not cheap, for 8 damage. So if I run out of ammo, I'll just play another one. It didn't really cost me much in my deck. The level 2 is okay. It ignores the retaliate, has a +2 hitting, which helps you with failing. But I'm just throwing that up there. But there's a level 2 32 Colt. We're looking at level 0 over here on the right. This one has no bonus to hit, but gets you 6 ammo. If you're Mark Harrigan, if you've got a good way to pass these tests, then this is 12 damage. It only costs you 3 resources. So again, keep that in the back of your mind. Like, there's lots of benefits for those big guns that we saw, but can we get them in other ways? Instead of playing, um, say, the larger weapon that has a much better bonus to hit, I can play a small weapon and maybe a B cop or guard dog to get the other damage in or to increase my bonus to hit. Some of the action compression I can get in other ways too. So um, that's the biggest challenge I think for the big guns is am I just better off spending less XP and figure out a way with the smaller ones, not to mention the melee ones. All right, rest of the video, let's actually take a look at all the big Guardian and Rogue cards that are the guns and see what sort of benefits that they tend to employ. And in the back of our mind, we'll think about that Gatling gun too. So first off, the shotgun. This is the classic big gun in the core set. It only has 2 ammo, but it's got a big promise. It gives you a nice bonus to hit, +3. If you're rolling, you're fighting at 8 right off the bat, but you kind of want to be higher than that because the gun asks you to succeed by probably 5, because you want to do 5 damage. If you can do this, if you can succeed by 5 on both your shots, you do 10 damage for the 1 card and the 4 XP and 5 resources. But only 2 actions. I'm underplaying this, but it's true that if you can get rid of enemies before they have a chance to fight you in the enemy phase to attack back, then that sort of action compression is really good. The problem is with this card is you only have the 2 shots, and if you miss, auto fail or whatever else, it's a big problem. You also need to refill the weapon. If you can do that, then that's good. But if you can't, then I think this struggles a lot, and you wonder why this is so much better than even just a level 0 45 automatic. Lightning gun. This is 3 ammo for 9 damage, right? 1 card, 9 damage. A huge bonus to hit. But is 9 damage enough? Again, the level 0 45 automatic does 8, right? 4 ammo, 2 apiece. Action compression is there, but I think that it is a big ask for 5 XP and 6 resources. It's been pretty much outclassed by other weapons. The M1918 bar, this one is a little bit like the Gatling gun in that it has a large number of uses, but the ammo itself is only damage. So you spend 1 to 5, which is similar to the Gatling gun, which was 1 to 6. You get plus X for the attack, and instead of the standard damage, you do X damage, which is the amount of ammo that you deal. So you deal 5 damage at once, and then another 3. That's okay. I mean, you want to use it as much as you can and in as few actions as you can, because otherwise you're paying a lot for a very limited weapon, right? Imagine that you're spending just 2 at a time here. Then it's exactly the same as the 45 automatic, and you get +2 instead of +1. That's awful. Now, I know someone in the comments section the other day when I brought up this card in my Forgotten Age review that you have the flexibility, right? And that's one of the benefits of this card over something like the lightning gun, that you can deal with the smaller enemies and you don't feel so bad. I don't know if I buy that, though. I think you still feel pretty bad about putting something so expensive in your deck when you didn't need it. How can you possibly know if you need it or not, right? I hear the criticism of that, that the flexibility is worth it, but I don't think the downside of running with the smaller weapons is so big that the flexibility of this card is a huge benefit. Again, imagine you have a larger enemy that's 5 health. Fighters tend to be in a position where they can deal with them over the course of their turn. And like I said, if you're dealing with it so quickly, what else are you doing during your turn? What justified putting the 4 XP card in your deck? That's just my thought. Now, if you get a ton of, if you put a ton of ammo in here, contraband, etc., it starts to look better, but I'm not sure it's worth the whole combo. We've got the Springfield M1903, which I'm showing here in its mutated form because it's way better. It's interesting actually to talk about instead of the version that just says you do 3 damage and can't attack enemies that are engaged with you. Now it has this ability to target non-elites up to one location away, ignore the aloof, and retaliate. So this is like an interesting card that requires you to have a sidearm. If you can't attack enemies that are engaged with you, you better have a way of dealing with them. It's awkward, but I think it's kind of a fun idea for 4 XP, 4 resources to be able to just blast something that is next door. That saves you the action, right? The problem is just the hand slots. Like, why? How often is this a a good tech card to put it into your deck? Probably sometimes. I can think of a few scenarios where I'd love it, but you need another thing to do. Probably it's the Brand of Cthulhu. Flamethrower is an interesting one because it takes up a body slot as well. So holding a bandolier in this, holding this with the bandolier is not a thing. So you need another way to deal with enemies. Of course, it has the ability to deal, its damage among enemies engaged with you. So it's like the M19 bar, M1918 bar, and the flamethrower combined are like that Gatling gun that we saw before. This one gives you a big boost to hit. It's going to fight the enemy that's engaged with you the highest fight, so it's going to be a tough one. And then you do 4 damage. So this one is 1 card for 16 damage. I think that's really, really good. And if you are stuck with just 1 damage, or 1 enemy, sorry, that has like 2 health, I think you have to play other cards for that. You need either the Brand of Cthulhu, like I said, or you're playing Guard Dog Beat Cop, some way to deal damage without using the ammo here. Or maybe you don't care because you've just added so much ammo to it with other cards. I think the big plus for me with this card, was why it's so strong, is that even if you kind of waste the ammo, like on a 3 health enemy, it's just 1 ammo. And putting single ammo back, like with the extra ammunition or Venturer, is a lot more powerful than putting like 1 ammo back onto something like the Gatling gun or the bar, which is just 1 damage. So I'm happy to pay the 6 experience for this for 16 damage because it's it's gonna do a lot, I think. 4 damage is a lot on 1 action. Notably, you can do this 4 times, whereas the Gatling gun, you can only do it twice when you're firing max ammo. And this, if you fail, it's not going to hurt as much. Okay, lastly, we've got a large weapon that only costs 3 XP. So it's on the cheaper end of putting it into your deck. It's the 45 Thompson. It does cost a lot, though, to put into play, but it'll pay you back. So it's got 5 ammo, so this will do 10 damage. Pretty good for the price. And you get a reasonable bonus to hit. I didn't put the level 0 in here because it's level 0, but the difference between it and this one is that you get the resources back. You spend the ammo, you get to put the resource into your resource pool. So basically, so you're ready to play the next one. Great gun. I think it's just a solid weapon that's not trying to do too much, and therefore the price is reasonable. And you don't feel so bad about throwing it away, especially if you have active desperation. The others are in other classes. So let's take a look at Rogue. There's 3 of them. There's the old shotgun, which I guess is a multi-class card. And then there's 2 survivor weapons that act a lot like weapons that are firearms with uses too. We can quickly go through these. So these are kind of competition for the Gatling gun because they are big rogue weapons. None of them are 5 XP though. I deliberately left out the shotgun because it is a one-handed weapon and doesn't really fit with the pattern here. I also left out the Winchester, by the way, which is a level 0 Guardian one, but you can take that for what it will. The Beretta, I think, is a nice weapon with 4 ammo. The amount that you deal with this weapon is going to depend on how much you succeed by. If you do succeed by 2, you can deal an additional damage. So best case scenario, you do 12 damage here, which is very comparable to what we saw with the Gatling gun, but you're doing 3 at a time. There's also the risk that we saw with the Mauser, where if you fail or you don't succeed by enough, you can't keep firing this away. So it's a risk, but I think this fits with the rogue card pool that really wants you to succeed by a lot anyway. So you don't feel bad about over succeeding by tons because you're doing a lot with that whole package. I mean, this came out in the Winifred deck, so like that makes sense with it, but maybe there's more support for the Gatling gun style of fighting instead. But I like the Beretta because it does feel like it's a piece of a larger archetype. Chicago Typewriter, this is a big, big weapon that just says we're dealing 12 damage. No questions asked here. Well, there's 5 resources involved, but you could probably afford that in Rogue. Spend 1 ammo, and you can also get an extra bonus to hit if you have some extra actions to throw away. Which is interesting, right? Because I said before that the efficiency of these weapons is kind of the point, but if you're in a tough spot, I think since Rogue is the extra action class, that this makes some sense to have it stapled to a weapon. I like it. I think this one is underrated just because it's so expensive. But really, it's 12 damage, and you probably don't need to deal so much at once, right? The Gatling gun's issue is that if you're not spending all 6 at once, is it really worth it? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that yet. But this one for sure just says, hey, you have a 3 fight or 3 health enemy, I'll deal with it. 45 Thompson, this is the other version of it. It's the Rogue one. It's a little bit cheaper, and it too has some action compression, which is like Gatling gun. So you spend an ammo. If you succeed by a bunch, you can spend some more ammo and then deal the same damage from that attack to another enemy at your location. Again, 3 XP, so it doesn't have the extra damage stapled to it. So you're only dealing a maximum of 10. But you can get some action compression out of this. You can maybe even commit something like a vicious blow and get 3 damage out of this anyway, and then an extra 3 damage from your the ammo that you spend again. This card does require you put more cards that add more ammo onto it, I think, to make it worth it. Kind of. But I mean, even so, if you eat through the ammo pretty quickly, it feels pretty comparable to the Gatling gun because you're dealing maybe 4 or 6 damage with your 2 ammo. You're just doing it more quickly. Honestly, I kind of like this weapon. I haven't played with it much, but if you're in a spot where you actually need the action compression, you commit extra to it to hopefully succeed by enough. It depends on what their fight value is, but it feels very similar to the Gatling gun. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like this is a similar idea, but only 3 XP. All right. Then we have a couple of misc ones. We have the old shotgun. I'm not sure how much I want to talk about this. It's a wacky card, right? That you have to get some ammo onto it first by playing the card through an event. Ever vigilant, etc. That kind of stuff can work, and it's very, very cheap. And it looks like a little baby shotgun because it does do 3 damage per ammo as long as you are succeeding by enough. All right. Good if you want to make it work. And like my whole theme here is that you do need to do a lot to make all these weapons work. Maybe less so for something like the typewriter, but a lot of them are asking for you to do something to put more ammo on them if you're going to use this as a main fighter in a whole scenario. Otherwise, you're going to have to switch it out for something else. Only 2 XP. Old hunting rifle. Again, this one came out in TFA, and it just looks so good. It only costs 3. It only has 3. Only costs 3 XP. It only costs you 3 resources to put into play. It is 2 hands. It gives you +3 on fighting, and it does 3 damage. So you've got baseline 9. This is pretty close to some of those bigger weapons. The problem is the risk for failing is big. And even if you draw a skull, you fail too. So that's also bad. I really want to make this thing work better. I think I said the other day that it reads better than it actually plays, and it's because of this two-handed issue. If it's out there and you fail, you're in a world of hurt, and you don't have a real backup. And that's for sure true in Survivor. That's probably not going to have ways to put other things in the hand slots, unless you, I guess, have the off-class access. Adding ammo is just not a thing either. I mean, you can recur it, which I suppose is part of the point, but I don't think you have a good solution for when the problem is right in your face. It's still there, though. Anyway, then there's Chainsaw, which is actually a melee weapon. However, it looks like and acts like all these firearms because it has supplies. And this one is basically identical to the old hunting rifle, except for you pay one more XP and one more resource to not have that drop back. So you're dealing, well, you don't get as much of a bonus to hit, but you deal extra damage. If you fail, it refills itself, and you have a choice of just dealing the extra damage if you fail anyway. So this is obviously has synergy with the Survivor card pool, which is neat, but it does actually fulfill the same niche as these other weapons where you have to figure out a way to refill it, because you don't actually want to fail these unless you are playing with oops and live and learn and whatnot. You really just look at this and say this is for sure 9 damage, right? Potentially you could do a little bit less if you just don't need it as much, but refilling it with supplies can be done with the cleaning kit or the venture anyway, so it does feel very similar. But I'm putting it at the end because it does behave a little bit differently than the other cards, because the card pool is different, and it has its own way of refilling. Okay, back to this thing. So evaluating it one more time, I think it does fit in all right with the current card pool. I'm not sure it's worth the 5 XP unless you really are going all in on the Contraband Swift Reload. If you don't have those, I'm not sure that this is going to do enough unless you hold it back and you are able to sneak it in. Now, the good news is that I am sure that there will be more cards that are like Contraband and Swift Reload. We have a little bit of confirmation. This is from the Mythos Busters Discord. Nick, who is one of the designers, who certainly designed this gun, said that, well, it's not the only cool gun in the box, so that's good, but that he's also exploring a lot more changes to firearms. And I don't know what that means exactly, but we're going to find out. I'm hoping that, I mean, we're not going to get like now firearms all do extra damage or ignore retaliate or something like that compared to melee weapons. We're not going to do that in this game, I think, since that would require a lot of changes to the existing card pool. But there might be more things you can do, like permanent cards that start giving you those kinds of abilities. We know Michael McGlenn is in this box, so you expect there to be more support for this archetype, but I do feel like the Gatling gun does fit in with the ones we already have seen. It's not really much better except for in specific circumstances. I think weapons in general, are hard to be tech cards for a campaign because you have a lot of different obstacles, I think, in a campaign, different types of enemies, and you need something that is in play already before you know what kinds of enemies you're dealing with. That's my opinion on why I tend to shy away from them. However, I think they're pretty fun to play. They are very flashy. If you have ways of refilling them or recurring them that work, it does solve a lot of problems very quickly. If you are a big card game gun aficionado, hopefully not a real life gun aficionado, please let me know what you think of the big guns in this game and the expansion that we're going to be seeing, and some ideas that you might have to improve the whole archetype and what would get you to put them into your deck. For now, though, thank you for watching. Feel free to check out more videos on my channel. I'm desperately waiting for the Drowned City article to come out sometime soon. We can talk about more of the cards and ideas from that new expansion. I'll see you next time.